My nephew signed me into a nursing home on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and I stayed in there 334 days. The front door was never locked. Not once. There was a keypad on the memory wing at the back and alarms on the fire doors, but the front door opened onto a parking lot like the front door of a bank, and any resident who could walk was free to walk out of it. I could walk. So you tell me why a man with two good legs and a clear head sat in room 211 for 11 months and never once went out through it. I have had a year to chew on that question, and I'm going to answer it tonight, including the part of the answer that does not make me look good. My name is Ward Kesselring. I am 78 years old, and for 42 years I was a carman for the railroad at the Cutler Junction Yard in Paulet County, Nebraska. A carman is the fellow who walks the train. Before a cut of cars leaves a yard, somebody goes down the whole length of it on foot, both sides, looking at brake rigging and couplers and hoses and journals and tapping the wheels with a long-handled hammer to hear how they ring. That was me. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something, and I am asking because it is going to make the rest of this easier for me to tell. Everybody who worked with their hands carries one sound around with them for the rest of their life. Not a song, a work sound, a press coming down, a bell on a switchboard, the particular clank a milk can makes going into a cooler. Mine is a hammerhead striking a steel wheel in the cold, and I still hear it when I wake up at 4 in the morning from pure habit. Put yours down in the comments below. Just a sound, in your own way. I would like to know what the rest of you are still hearing. Here is the thing about tapping wheels that took me about 9 years to really understand. A cracked wheel does not ring louder. That is what everybody guesses, and everybody guesses wrong. A crack does not make the sound bigger, it makes the sound go away. A good wheel rings, and it keeps ringing, and the ring hangs there in the air after your hammer has already come off the steel. A cracked wheel gives you a thud, and then nothing. Dead. Flat. It sounds like hitting a sandbag. The sound of a cracked wheel is so much quieter, so much less dramatic, than the sound of a good one, that a green man will walk right past it, because his ear is set up to notice noise, and what he needs to be noticing is the absence of noise. 42 years of a trade comes down to that. You are not listening for something wrong. You are listening for something missing. I want you to hold on to that, because everything that happened to me happened in the quiet. My wife was Ruth Ann. Everybody in Cutler Junction called her Ruthie, including me, and including the ones who were afraid of her, which was most of the town at one time or another. She ran the post office window for 39 years. When she started, the counter was oak, and you could still send a package to Alaska for less than the price of a sandwich, and when she finished, the counter was laminate and she had a computer she referred to in front of customers as the machine. Ruthie knew where every family in that county lived, who they owed, who was writing to them from prison, and who had quit writing. She never once told any of it. 39 years behind a window in a town of 1,100 people, and she never told one single thing. I have thought about that a lot lately. The woman knew everything and kept everything, and I never appreciated, until I was in that home, what a rare kind of strength that is. She died 3 years ago in April. It was her heart, and it was fast, and I am grateful for that even now. She lowered herself onto the porch step to get her shoes off because the heat had swelled her feet, and she said, "Lord, this step is farther down than it used to be," and then she was gone before I got the screen door open. 49 years of marriage, and her last complete sentence was about a step. That step is where all of this starts, so remember. Because 8 months after she died, in the middle of an ice storm in November, I came down that same porch step in the dark carrying a bag of softener salt, and my heel went out from under me, and broke me. I laid on that concrete for about 40 minutes before the neighbor's boy came by with a man. It was 19 degrees. I remember being embarrassed, which is a strange thing to do when it was freezing, and I remember thinking very clearly that Ruthie would have found me in 4 minutes. The rotting was impossible. Then there was pneumonia, as there always is. And then there were 10 weeks in a rehabilitation unit where a young woman named Petra made me stand up out of a chair over and over until I could do it 30 times without using my arms. By the first week of March, I could walk the length of a hallway with a cane, and I could get in and out of a truck, and I could sign my own name, and the doctor told my nephew that I was cleared to go home with somebody looking in on me. That is the last sentence of the easy part. Now I have to tell you about Dale. And to do that, I have to tell you about my brother. My brother Roy was 6 years younger than me, and he was the better of the two of us in every way that shows. He worked in the pattern shop at the foundry over in Bellwood. In the summer of 1991, a crane operator lifted a mold with a bad chain, and Roy was standing where nobody should ever stand, which was under it. His wife had already left by then, so Dale came to live with Ruthie and me 2 weeks after the funeral, and he was 14 years old and about as angry as a person can be without setting something on fire. We raised him from 14 to 19. Ruthie taught him to drive. I taught him to weld, badly, and he taught himself to weld properly a few years later. He called us Aunt Ruthie and Uncle Ward for the first 4 years, and then he stopped calling us anything, which is a boy's way of getting close to you. He is 49 now. He has a shop out on the state highway where he repairs and sells trailers, the flatbed and stock kind. He is good at that work. He has also never had 6 months running where the money came out even. I want to be very careful here, because it would be easy for me to stand in front of you and hand you a villain. Dale is not a villain. Dale is a man who has spent 30 years being one bad quarter away from the end, and there is a thing that happens to a person who lives like that for long enough. He stops being able to tell the difference between an emergency and a Tuesday. Everything is an emergency, and a man for whom everything is an emergency will start doing arithmetic on the people around him without ever once deciding to be a bad man. The day I was discharged, Dale picked me up in his dually with the trailer plates on it. He had a folder on the dash. He said the county had been out to look at the house, and the roof over the back bedroom had let go into the ice, and there was water in the wall, and the insurance adjuster would now be out for a while, and he had found a place where I could stay while I got fixed. 2 weeks, he said. 3 at the outside. We drove to Prairie Ridge Care Center on the north edge of town, and I signed a page. He turned around for me, and he signed a page too, and the woman at the desk was kind. He had a cold. That is how it happened. There was no amber. There was no forged signature. Nobody drugged me, and nobody lied to a judge. My nephew told me the roof was leaking, and I believed him, and I signed my own name with my own hand in blue. Now, here is the part I promised you. The part that was not a 2 weeks went by. Dale said the adjuster had rescheduled. 4 weeks went by, and he said the contractor was booked into June. 8 weeks went by, and by then something had happened to me that I did not have a name for at the time. I did not want to leave. Not because it was nice in there. It was not nice. But in that building, I was not the man who decided anything. I did not decide when to eat, or what, or whether the furnace needed looking at, or which bill was the one that mattered this month, or whether to finally go through Ruthie's closet. For 50 years, I had been the one who walked the train. Everybody in that yard, and everybody in that house, went home safe because I decided a thing was safe. And I was tired in a way that sleep does not touch. And somebody had come along and taken the whole weight of deciding off of me, and I let them, and it felt like sitting down. That is my part in this. Nobody imprisoned me. I sat down and I stayed. Sat down, and the relief of not being in charge of my own life is the door that every single person who takes things from old people walks through. It does not get broken open. It gets held open from the inside by us. I bring my bad order book with me everywhere, and I had it in my bag that March. And out of 42 years of habit, I opened it up on the 3rd night and started writing in it again. That book is the only reason I'm able to tell you the rest of this. There were 2 things in that duffel bag that were not closed. One was the book. The bad order book is nothing to look at. Mine was a black pocket ledger with a rubber band around it. The 4th one I owned, and the other 3 were in a coffee can in my garage. When a carman finds a defect, he hangs a card on the car, and that card is called a bad order, and the car gets cut out of the train and set over on the rip track until it is fixed. You do not stop the train. You do not condemn the train. You take one car, and you write it down, date, time, initials, the number of the car, what you found, and what you did about it. Line after line after line for 4 decades. I could not tell you why I kept writing in it after I retired. I wrote down when the birds happened. I wrote down what a bird was. Ruth used to say I would write down my own funeral. The other thing was the hammer. It is about 18 inches of hickory with a small hardened head on it, and the head is worn crooked on one face because for 42 years I struck at the same angle. The railroad did not give it to me. A man named Bill Souter gave it to me in 1967 when he retired because he had watched me for a month and decided I was worth the wood, and that is the only award I ever got in my life. It lived on the windowsill over my kitchen sink for 20 years after I quit, and Ruthie never once moved it to clean. She cleaned around it, and when the physical therapist told me to bring something from home to help me get oriented, that is what I put in the bag. I know how that sounds. Other men bring a photograph. So, 11 months. Let me tell you how 11 months of a man's life gets taken, because it is not one big thing, and I think that is what everybody gets wrong. Week 3, my room phone quit working. I told the aide, and the aide told maintenance, and maintenance came and said the jack was bad, and it was on the list. It stayed on the list. There was a phone in the front lounge that anybody could use, and there was a pay telephone by the vending machines that still took coins because the building was old, so it was not as if I was cut off. It was just that calling anybody now took a plan, and a walk, and change, and a person waiting to use it after you. Week 5, my mail stopped. I want to sit on this one because of who my wife was. A carrier will not fight you over a change of address. If a form comes in with the right name and the right old address and a new address, the mail goes to the new address. That is the whole system. Ruthie ran a post office window for 39 years, and she used to say that the mail is the most trusting thing the government does. Dale filled out a form to have my mail come to his shop, and I know why he told himself he was doing it. Somebody had to pay the electric bill on a house with a hole in the roof. That is a completely reasonable thing for a nephew to do. It is also how a man stops seeing his own bank statements. Week 9, they moved me from a room by the front to a room in the back hall because a couple wanted to be together and a couple needed to go by the front. That was true, and it was decent, and I said yes myself. Week 12 is where the quiet started. And remember what I told you about the quiet? Inez Duffy cleaned the back hall on day shift. She is maybe 60, born in Scots Club, hands like sandpaper. She is the only person in that building who talked to me like a man rather than like a weatherman. In week 12, she was wiping down my sill, and she said, without looking up, "Mr. Kesselring, your friend with the good head comes on Sunday, and he tells me you were arrested." I said, "What?" She said, "The tall one, who drives the tan car." That was Sherman. Sherman drove a school bus for that county for 31 years. It has known me since before either of us could grow a mustache. He'd been coming on Sunday afternoons and going home. I asked Inez, who told him I was resting. She got very careful. She said it was on my chart. She said there was a note. So I asked to see the note. And they were pleasant with me, and they said they would look into it, and nothing happened. And I asked again, and nothing happened again. And I am ashamed to tell you that I let it go for another 2 months. Because asking the third time takes something out of you that a 78-year-old man does not have a whole lot of. But I did start writing. On the 14th of June, I opened that black book and I put down 14 June, 14:20 hours, IND states S.OT turned away at desk. Sundays, count unknown. Bad order, no card hung. And after that, I wrote down everything. Here is a thing I did not plan and could not have planned, and it saved me. I wrote in that book the way a carman writes, not in sentences, in the shorthand of the trade. A defect on a wheel is not a crack, it is a shelled tread or a thermal crack or a built-up tread, and each of those has a letter code, and a car is not a car, it is a reporting mark and a number. So when a nurse or an aide picked that book up off my tray table, and a few of them did, what they saw was 3/4 of a page of block capitals and abbreviations that did not mean one single thing to a person who had not stood in a rail yard. One of the aides handed it back to me and said, "Real gentle, the way you talk to a dog with a hurt paw. That is nice, honey. You keep working on that." I let her think. I am not proud of the pleasure I took in that, but I took it. By the end of the summer, that book had 100 and some entries. Every visitor I heard about. Every time a man in a polo shirt came and stood in the hall with a clipboard. Every time I asked to see my own chart. By then I had learned it was something I had a right to ask for, how long it took, and what I was told. Every single one of my own medications by name and by hour, because I had watched them do it 1,100 times, and I know what 100 milligrams of anything looks like coming out of a pouch. Dates, times, initials, what I found, and what I did not. Nobody told me. I want to say that plainly because in these stories somebody is always poisoning somebody, and that is not what this is. My care was ordinary. Some days, it was kind. The building was clean and the food was salty, and there was a woman down the hall who sang hymns at 3 in the morning, and everybody in that place, top to bottom, was doing the best they could with 2 aides for 19 residents. What happened to me did not happen to the nurse. It happened in the paperwork. In August, Dale's daughter came. Franny is 16. She had a learner's permit and a job scooping at the drive-in, and she came on a Wednesday afternoon by herself with a plate of the bars her mother makes, the ones with the pretzels in them, and she sat on the end of my bed with her shoes off like she had been doing since she was 4. She talked for an hour about a horse she does not own and a boy she was not going to admit to. And then she looked around the room at the vinyl chair and the curtain track and my duffel bag still packed under the window after 5 months, and she said the thing that turned this whole story over. She said, "Uncle Ward, how come you did not just move back in when they finished?" I said, "Finished what?" She said, "Your house, the roof. Dad and Uncle Lyle did it themselves. They were up there over Easter. I brought them a cooler." Easter! That was the last week of March. I had been in that building for 11 days when the roof over my back bedroom was already fixed. I did not let anything show on my face. 42 years of telling a foreman that his train is not leaving is good practice for keeping your face still. I asked her about the horse again, and she told me some more, and she hugged me, and she left. And then I sat in that vinyl chair until the dinner cart came, and I did not move. Now understand what I was working with. A man had told me something untrue in order to keep me somewhere. That is bad, but it is not necessarily a crime, and it is not necessarily even greed. It is exactly the kind of thing a tired man does when he cannot face a hard conversation. Uncle Ward, I do not think you should live alone anymore, and I do not know how to say that to you, so I'm going to say the roof is not done. I have known people to do worse for less. If that had been all of it, I would have had a conversation with him, and we would still be having Sunday dinners. But 2 weeks later, the desk put somebody else's name on that thread. It was my own billing name, and it should have gone to the shop with everything else, and some new girl at the front had put it in the room slot because my name was on it. It was 2 pages. The first page was the monthly private pay rate for a semi-private room, and the number on it was a great deal more money than I paid each month in that building cost, and it had been paid every month, on time, out of my credit union account. The second page was a photocopy of a cover letter that had no business being there at all, from a company in Omaha called Kingsborough Funding Partners. It was addressed to the business office. It was 3 lines long, and it was blank. It said that they were confirming receipt of the facility's response regarding the residents' level of care, and it said, at the bottom, a phrase I read maybe 40 times, that night, assignment inquiry, C file. I did not know what that meant, but I have spent my whole life around the word assignment, and I know what a file is, and I knew right then, sitting on the edge of that bed at 9 o'clock at night, that somewhere in that building there was a folder with my name on it that I had never seen. Come morning, I finally did what an April version of me ought to have done. I went to the front desk at 9 o'clock, when the office manager is there and the shift is fresh and nobody is short-handed yet, and I put my hand flat on the counter and I said I wanted to look at my own record and I would like to know today when I could do that. She did not fight me. She said she would need to check with the administrator. And I said, that is fine, and I stood right there and did not move because I have learned that a request you make and walk away from is a request that goes in a drawer, and a request you make while standing there is a request somebody has to answer. 2 days later, they sat me at a table in the little conference room with a binder and a girl from the business office who was told to stay with me. She was maybe 25 and she was nice and she had no idea what she was guarding. What I want to tell you about that binder is this, and if you take nothing else from tonight, take this. Every person in a nursing home in this country gets assessed on a standard federal form on a schedule, and that form asks, in plain terms, whether the resident knows where he is, whether he knows what season it is, whether he can make his own daily decisions, whether he can feed and dress and walk. It is the same form in every state. It goes to the government. The facility fills it out honestly because they get audited on it, and because their payment depends on it, and because the woman filling it out is a nurse who does not want to lose her license for a family treatment. I read 3 of them, spring, summer, and the one from that month. And one of them said the same thing, oriented, independent of daily decision-making, ambulatory device, no indicator, your own paperwork said I was fine. I turned one more page than I was supposed to because the girl was looking at her phone and I found a scheduling sheet with my last name on it and a room number in the 400s. The 400 hall is behind the keypad. I closed the binder and thanked her and went back to my room and wrote it all down. Then I got $4 in quarters from Ines and went to the pay telephone by the vending machines and I called my credit union. Now, I will be straight with you about how that call felt because there is a specific humiliation in it that I think a lot of you have had. The young man on the phone was polite. I gave him my member number, which I have known since 1971. I asked for my balance. He told me it was less money than I had carried in that account since the Ford administration. I asked him what had gone out. He said the monthly draft to the care center and some checks, and I asked who wrote the checks, and he said, "Sir, Mr. Kesselring is on the account." I said, "I am Mr. Kesselring." He said, "The other Mr. Kesselring." There it was. And here's the question that turned out to be worth everything. And I did not ask it because I am clever. I asked it because I spent 42 years around a job where the difference between a fitting and an identical-looking fitting is the difference between a train and a funeral. I asked him, on the account, in what capacity? He said, "Sir?" I said, "Is he a joint owner, or is he an authorized signer, or is he there for convenience?" Because those are 3 different things, and they are 3 different pieces of paper, and somebody at your institution knows which one it is. There was a long pause and some typing. He said, "I would have to pull the signature card." I said, "I would consider it a personal favor if you would pull the signature card." More typing. And then he came back and he read me the top line off a card that had been sitting in a file drawer in Cutler Junction since the year my wife retired. And he sounded a little bit surprised himself. And what he read me was that the second name on that account had been added at the request of the primary owner as a convenience signer. No ownership interest, no right of survivorship. Ruby set that up. In 2011, she wanted somebody young who would run to the bank if we were both asked the manager to put it in as convenience. She made him show her where it said so, and then she went home and never mentioned it to me again because that is who she was. I stood there at that payphone with my hand on the coin return, and for the first time in 11 months, I was not tired. If you have ever had somebody explain your own life back to you slowly, in a kind voice, as though you were a child who wandered into the room, then stay with me here, because the next part is where this stops being about a nephew and starts being about something a whole lot bigger. And I would take it as a kindness if you would subscribe before I tell it, so that the ones who have lived this can send the rest of it too. Odell Pruitt was my lawyer for a long time, and she is 91 and she's in a home herself now, 2 counties over, which is a joke God did not have to make. But her daughter Lorna took over the practice, and Lorna answered on a Thursday and did not ask me one single question about whether I was confused. She said, "Ward, do you want me to come out there?" I said, "I want you to open my old file first, the one from '96, because there is a piece of this I have not told you yet." In August of 1996, I was working the second shift at Cutler Junction, and a cut of cars came off the hump with a brake that did not set, and I was between the rails with my back turned. I got most of the way out. Most of the way is not all of the way. I lost the last 2 fingers on my left hand and about half the hearing on that side, and I spent 5 months learning how to hold a hammer with 3 fingers. Railroad men do not get workers' compensation the way other men do. There is a federal law from 1908 that covers us instead, and under that law you sue your employer, and my employer settled with me, and the settlement was not one big check. That was Ruthie's doing. The lawyers wanted a lump sum. Odell wanted a lump sum. And my wife sat in that office in a good dress and said, "Absolutely not." She said, "If you hand this man a pile of money, he will give it to his brother's boy and to the church, and to whoever comes to the door, and in 9 years he will be 70, and he will have a hammer and a handshake." She made them structure the whole thing. A payment every month for the rest of my life, and 2 larger payments, one at 75 and one at 80. I was furious with her for about a year and a half. I told her she had put me on an allowance. She said, "I put you on a railroad." Ward, a railroad is a thing that goes where it is going when you feel like it or not, and that is the entire point of one. Those payments are what a nursing home costs. That is not a coincidence. That is a reason who is smarter than me. Now, the settlement built that way has one feature, and I need every one of you to write down something. That kind of an annuity cannot be sold, not the way you sell a car. Every state in this country has a law on it, and Nebraska's law says that no transfer of those payment rights means anything at all unless a judge has approved it in advance, in a written order, in a real proceeding, after looking at whether it is in the best interest of the person receiving it. There is a whole industry of companies that will offer you money today for your payments tomorrow, and they are not criminals, and some of them do honest work, but every one of them has to get through a courtroom to do it, and a courtroom is going to want to hear from you. Unless a courtroom is told that hearing from me would not be useful. Lorna called me back on Monday. She had the file, and she had made 3 phone calls, and I could hear her being careful with her voice. She said the annuity company had received a request for a benefits verification and an assignment package in April. She said the requesting party was Kingsborough Funding Partners. She said the file had a note in it that the payee was residing in a skilled nursing facility, and that the company had asked for documentation of the payee's capacity before they would go any further. And she said, "Ward, there is a petition on file at the district court. It is set for a hearing in 5 weeks. Your name is on it as the payee." I asked her what they still needed. She said, "They need a physician's statement. They cannot get it in front of a judge as an uncontested matter without something in writing from a doctor saying that you are not capable of managing your own financial affairs." I said, "How does a man get that letter?" She said, "Usually out of a care conference." And I said, "Well," because there was a green sheet of paper taped to my closet door with an appointment on it that I had not thought about twice. Interdisciplinary care plan meeting, Thursday morning at 10, family invited. Dale had asked for it. Dale had asked for it in July. I sat there with the receiver against my good ear, and I thought about a 100-ton car coming down off the hump with nothing holding it, and how the only reason anybody ever survives it is that one man on the ground already knew it was coming. On the Saturday before that Thursday, I put on my good shirt, my jacket, my boots, and I walked out the front door of Prairie Ridge Care Center at 20 minutes past 8 in the morning. I want you to hear how that happened, because I had built it up in my mind into something enormous. I stopped at the desk. I said, "I am going out for the day." The weekend girl slid the clipboard open and said, "Sign here and put the time, and are you being picked up or walking?" I said, "Walking." She said, "It is supposed to get warm. Do you want a water?" I said, "No, thank you." And then I pushed the door and went outside. That is all. That is the whole escape. you are a resident who has not been placed under a guardianship by a judge, that building is a place you live, not a place you are kept, and you can leave it the way you can leave a hotel. I had been sitting inside a door that was not locked for 11 months, and it took a girl with a clipboard 4 seconds to open it for me. I am telling you that because somebody listening tonight has a mother or a father in a building like that who thinks the same thing I thought, and because somewhere out there is a woman in a room like mine who is not going to hear it from anybody else. It is 3.5 miles from the north edge of town out to my place on the Ostrander Road. It took me 2 hours and 10 minutes, and I had to sit down twice on the guardrail by the creek. A pickup slowed to ask if I needed a ride, and I said no. And I have never in my life meant anything the way I meant that no. The house was fine. That was the strange part. The grass was cut. There was a padlock on the propane tank, which is sensible. There was no hole in any roof. There was no water stain, no tarp, no plywood, nothing. And the shingles over the back bedroom were a slightly different color than the rest, the way they are when a job gets done in a hurry in cold weather by 2 men who are not roofers. There were 9 trailers in my yard. Flatbeds and 2 stock trailers, parked in rows on the south side where Ruthie's garden used to be, with the weeds grown up through the axles. My barn was full of trailer parts and coiled wire and about 40 tires. And the porch step was new. He had torn out the old concrete step. The one Ruthie sat down on and did not get up from. The one that took my hip in the ice. And he had poured a new one, wider, with a pipe rail bolted into it and a strip of that black grit tape across the front so a man cannot slip. I sat down on my own new step, and I put my head in my hands and I stayed there a while. Because that is the whole thing right there, is it not? He fixed the step. Nobody made him fix the step. Nobody was ever going to know who fixed the step, because the man it was for was not going home. He fixed the step. He stored his trailers in his wife's garden. He lied to me about a roof, and he wrote checks on an account he had no ownership in, and he had a hearing on the docket in 5 weeks to sell out the country. One thing my wife did to protect me from myself. All of that is one man. People are not one thing. If you have made it to my age, you already know that, and if you have not, I am sorry, you will. I let myself in with the key that was still under the same brick, and I sat in my kitchen, and I looked at the empty place on the windowsill where the hammer had been for 20 years. I could have stayed. I want to be clear that I could have stayed that night and never gone back, and let the hearing happen without me and lost, or with me and won, and been an old man alone in a house with 9 trailers in the yard. I did not stay. At 4:30 that afternoon, I walked back into Prairie Ridge and signed myself in on the same clipboard and went to my room and ate the salted fish they served on Saturdays. Because Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, in the little conference room with the fake wood table, my nephew was going to be sitting there with a doctor and a social worker and a nurse and a piece of paper he needed somebody to sign. And I had spent 42 years learning that you do not stop a train out on the main line where it is dangerous and there is nobody around. You let it come into the yard. There is a bulletin board in the front hall of every nursing home in America, and it is required to be there, and nobody looks at it. Fire inspection, menu, a notice about grievances, and a name and a telephone number for the long-term care ombudsman for that region. I had walked past that board twice a day for 11 months. On Sunday night, I stood in front of it with my reading glasses on and copied that number into the back of my black book with a golf pencil, and on Monday morning I fed quarters into the pay telephone and a woman answered and said, "This is Verna Poe." I did not know what an ombudsman was. I will save you the trouble of finding out the hard way. Every state has them. They are paid for out of an old federal law about older Americans. They do not work for the nursing home and they do not work for your family. They cost nothing, and what they do is stand next to a resident. That is it. That is the whole job. They are allowed into the building anytime the resident wants them. They are allowed to look at your chart if you say so. And a facility that tries to keep one out has a very bad week with the state. Verna Poe has a voice like a woman who has heard every version of this. I told her mine in about 6 minutes, flat. Give a report, no adjectives. Date, time, what I found, what I did about it. When I finished, she was quiet for a second and then she said, "Mr. Kesselring, do you know that you can invite whoever you want to the care conference?" I said, "No, ma'am, I did not know that." She said, "It is your meeting. It has always been your meeting. Everybody in that room works on your case, including your family. You are the case." I said, "Thursday at 10. He said, "I will be there at 4:10. And then I did 3 more things. I asked Enos Duffy on a break out by the dumpsters whether the front desk kept the visitor sign in sheets after they filled up. She said they go in a box in the storage room by the beauty shop, and they keep them a couple of years, and she said it in the tone of a woman who wanted to be asked a second question. I did not ask her to take anything, and she did not take anything. I asked her whether a resident could request copies of a public sign and log that had his own name written on it 40-some times. She said she thought a resident could ask the administrator, and she thought the administrator would say yes on a Wednesday when the state was already coming Thursday. I called Sherman Ott. He'd been turned away at that desk on 11 separate Sundays. He counted them out loud to me over the phone from his own calendar, and about halfway through his voice went and he said, "Ward, I thought you did not want to see me." I told him what I had written in my book on the 14th of June, and he did not say anything for a while, and then he said, "What time Thursday?" And I called Lorna Pruitt, and she said she would bring the file, and then she asked me the only hard question anybody asked me that week. She said, "Ward, do you want me to call Dale first?" I thought about it for a long time. Longer than she expected, I think. Here is where I came out. If I called him, one of two things happens. Either he cancels the meeting, and the petition goes to a judge in 5 weeks with a stack of paper and no old man in the room, or he shows up Thursday having had 3 days to arrange his case. And there was a third thing, and this is the one that decided it. That meeting was not a trap I was doing. That meeting was his. He called it. He picked the date and the time and the people. Every single person who was going to be in that room was going to be in that room because Dale Kesselring asked them to be. I have never once in 42 years hung a bad order card on a car that I did not first put my own hands on. I do not go looking for trouble, and I do not manufacture it. But when a defect walks into my yard on its own wheels at 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning, I am not going to pretend I did not do it. I told Lorna, no, do not call me. Tuesday and Wednesday I slept better than I had since the high school. Wednesday night I lay in the dark and I reached over and rapped my knuckles twice on the steel rail of that bed and listened to it ring, the way I have done in beds and door frames and church pews my whole life, and it rang clean, and I went to sleep. Thursday morning, Dale got there at 9:15, 3/4 of an hour early. He had 2 men with him in sport coats, and neither one of them was a doctor. They had put an extra table against the first one to make it long enough. Down one side sat my nephew, and beside him a man named Fen Karcher from Kingsborough Funding Partners in a gray sport coat with a folder in front of him, and beside Karcher, a quiet fellow with a stamp and a book who turned out to be a notary. Across from them was the administrator, Rowena Tice, and the director of nursing, Marcy Bledsoe, who had been at that building 19 years, and the social services director, a young man named Trent Adoodle, who had the decency to look uncomfortable before anything had even happened. At the end of the table, in the chair somebody had put there for the resident, was me, and behind me, standing, because there were not enough chairs, were Verna Poe from the State Ombudsman Office, and Lorna Pruitt with the banker's box, and Sherman Ott in the good hat. Dale stood up when he saw them. He said, "Uncle Ward, who are these people?" I said, "Sit down, Dale. This is my meeting." Mrs. Tice looked at Verna Poe, and Verna Poe handed her a card, and Mrs. Tice sat down about an inch faster than she meant to. Trent Adderdell started reading the agenda, because that is what you do, and I will give the boy credit. His voice only went out on him once. Item 1 was review of the current assessment. Item 2 was a discussion of transfer to the secured unit at 400 Hall. Item 3, and he read it exactly as it was typed, was family request for physician statement regarding financial capacity. And then Marcy Bledsoe read the assessment aloud, because item 1 comes before item 2, and because a nurse with 19 years in a building reads what is on the page. She read that I was oriented to person, place, time, and situation. She read that I was independent in daily decision-making. She read that I required no assistance with eating, dressing, or toilet. She read that I ambulated with a cane at supervision level. She read that there were no behaviors, wandering, exit-seeking, and no clinical indication for placement on a secured unit. Then she stopped, and she looked up over her glasses at Dale, and she said, "This is the 3rd quarter in a row that the revengestory." Nobody had to say one word. His own item, too, has been killed by his own item. By a nurse he had never met, while the form the government makes them fill out whether anybody in the family likes it or not. Karcher opened his folder. Verna Poe said, "Before we go on, Mr. Kesselring has some materials for the record." I put the file on the table. I told them what it was. I told them it was a bad order book, and that I had kept one for 42 years, and that I had kept this one since the 11th of March. And I read out of it, not all of it, 9 entries. Names, dates, times, initials. Every one of them a visitor turned away at that front desk. And I said, "This book is one man's word, so I would like the sign-in sheets." Rowena Tice had them. She had pulled them the day before when I asked, because I asked her on a Wednesday in writing, and because Verna Poe had already telephoned her. Sherman Ott's handwriting is on that log 11 times. 11 Sundays, arrival time and departure time, and the departure time is between 4 and 9 minutes after the arrival time, every single one of them. Trent Atterdale said very quietly that the note in the chart said the resident becomes agitated with visitors. I asked him who observed that. He looked at the page for a long moment, and then he said that the note was entered from a telephone call from the responsible party. That was the only time in the whole hour that I felt anything close to what you would call rage, and it went through me and it went on out the other side because it was not aimed at Dale. It was aimed at the fact that a man on a telephone can say 6 words about his uncle in a building full of professionals who write them down and act on them for 11 months and never once walk down the hall and check. Then Lorna set 3 pieces of paper in front of Ben Carter and turned them so he could read them right side up, which I thought was a nice touch. The first was the settlement agreement from 1996, a paragraph on the second page that says, those payments cannot be sold, assigned, pledged, or encumbered. The second was a letter dated that Monday from the annuity company stating that no court order authorizing the transfer by payment rights existed, that no such order had ever been entered, and that the company had placed the file on hold pending direct contact with FTE. The third was a photocopy of the signature card from the credit union in the town of 1100 people, dated in 2011, in my wife's handwriting, with a box check and a line under it. Mr. Carter read all 3. He was not a bad man either, for whatever that is worth. He read them, and he closed his folder, and he said, Mr. Kesselring, I apologize for the confusion. And he stood up, and the notary stood up with him, and they walked out, and neither one of them said a word to my nephew on the way past. And in the quiet after that door shut, from the chair by the wall where nobody had noticed her come in, my niece said the only thing anybody said in that room that I am still hearing. Franny said, Dad, did Uncle Ward ever get told he could go home? I called for a 10-minute recess in a meeting I was not chairing, and everybody took it, because at that point, I could have called for weather. I took Dale out the side door by the loading dock, where the smokers go, and we stood on the concrete in the cold with the propane tank humming behind us. I had a whole speech. I had been building it for 3 days, and it was a good one, and not one line of it came out of my mouth, and I have been grateful for that ever since. What I said was, how much? He tried to start somewhere else. I said it again. How much, Dale? Round it. And he told me it was the down payment on the shop building and 2 lease payments on the dually and the interest on a note he had taken out against inventory in the spring and about $11,000 of what it cost to keep me in that building that his own checkbook could not cover once my mail was going to his shop and my statements were going in a drawer he did not open. Then he said the thing they always say, and I have thought about it every day since. He said, I was going to put it back. And I said, I know you were. That is what makes it worse and not better. He said he could not have me out of that house alone. He said he had driven past 9 times that November before the neighbor boy found me, and he had not stopped once. He said the roof was true. The roof did leak. He just did not tell me when it stopped leaking. He said Kingsborough called him. He did not call them. They get names somehow. They always get names. And then my nephew, who is 49 years old and who I taught to weld badly, put both hands flat on the wall of that building and said, I did not know how to tell you that you were old. I put my hand on the back of his neck the way I did when he was 14 and we were standing in his father's grave, and I said, that is not a reason, but it is the truth, and I will take the truth. What came after is not a courtroom scene. If that is what you have been waiting on, I am sorry. The county attorney's office in Paulet County has investigated anyone who else wrong, and she opened a file because Verna Poe is required to report certain things and does not get to decide whether she feels like it. Nebraska has a statute about exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and it is a felony, and I will not sit here and act like Dale was never in any danger. He was. I gave a statement. In it I said, truthfully, that no signature of mine was ever given, that no money left that account without a card in the drawer with his name on it, and that I had been capable the entire time that he was capable. Miss Strong asked me if I wanted to be made whole. I said I wanted to be made whole, and I did not want a conviction. And I understood that it was not my decision. They worked out a restitution agreement. It takes 6 years. He is on year 1. The trailers came out of Ruthie's garden the second week. He did it alone, in the rain, 9 trips, and he did not ask me to come out and watch, and I did not come out and watch. And on the first Saturday of December, at the pancake feed the volunteer fire department puts on in the old depot, Dale Kesselring stood up in front of about 200 people, most of whom had spent a year thinking that poor Ward had lost his marbles and it was a shame, and he said out loud, into the microphone they used for the raffle, what he had done and what he had said and how long it had gone on. It took him 1 minute and 40 seconds. I timed it, because I time things. That is the part I would not have thought to ask for. That is Franny's doing. Sherman Ott and I have coffee at the trackside on Tuesdays and Sundays now, and he has never once said I told you so, because he never told me so, because he thought I did not want to see him. Ines Duffy still works the day shift on the back hall at Prairie Ridge. I take her a ham at Christmas, and she tries to give it back, and we do that every year now. I have been home 14 minutes. I sleep in my own bed. The Stepdale cord is a good step, and I use it every day of my life, and there is a lesson in that too, if you know it. And in June, when Franny turned 17, I gave her the hammer. She did not know what to do with it. Nobody does, at first. So I took her out to the yard, and I stood her in front of the axle of one of the last trailers, and I let her hit the good hub and listen, and then I let her hit the crack point that I had set aside for exactly this, and her face did what mine did in 1967. That is the only thing I have that is worth handing to anybody. I am Ward Kesselring, out on the Ostrander Road in Paulette County, Nebraska. You have stayed with me this long, you have earned the short version. Nobody comes and tells you the door is unlocked. Not the aides, not the state, not the people who love you. Somebody has to walk over and try the handle, and if you are 78 and tired, that somebody is going to have to be you, or it is going to have to be a 16-year-old who asks one honest question in a room full of adults who all knew better. Look at the people around your mother and your father. Do not listen for the loud ones. Loud is not the problem. Loud rings, and a thing that rings is fine. Listen for what has gone quiet, the friend who quit coming by, the bank statement that stopped showing up, the phone in the room that has been on the list since spring. And when you find it, do not condemn the whole train. Cut the one car out. Set it over on the rip track. Look at it in the daylight with somebody standing next to you who knows what they are looking at. And then, if it will hold air, put it back in the train. Mine held air. Yours might.